this part of our Python tutorials, we're going to talk about variables, different kinds of variables actually, because we've already talked about variables at the beginning of our Python tutorials. And here in this one, we're going to talk about different kinds of variables in terms of accessing that kind of variable. So for example, we're inside of a function or a class, and we want to declare a kind of a variable inside of it, and then we want to access it from outside of a function, and we want to know whether it's accessible or not. Also, we're going to see if we can access a variable from inside of a function, which the kind of variable that has been declared outside of the function or variable, and then we want to access it here. We want to see if it's possible, and we want to see the differences between these two and what are local and global variables. So here I'm going to create a new file and going to call it kinds of variables.py. So here I'm going to declare a new number. For example, I'm going to call it a equals 5, and here I'm going to declare a new function. So here in this part I'm going to write, for example, function. You can write function, name of the function, and I'm not going to put in any kinds of inputs, and I'm going to print a and see if a is accessible from outside of the function, which is the answer. Which answer is yes, because I'm going to explain later why that happens. You might think that, okay, we have defined a function and this variable is not defined as global, but how is it that we can access a from inside of a function? So let's see what happens here. Okay, so you should care about indentations, and there we go. So let's save the code and Python 3 kinds of variables.py. And as you can see here, we can get a from print a, which is the result of printing this one. Also, if you run function or call the function, you should be able to see 2.5 here. As you can see, we have 2.5. So the second time we call the function, instead of printing a, the same job is done, and here we can, as a result, we can access a. And notice that in the main body of your code, every variable that you declare is by default considered as a global variable, no matter whether you write global a or not. And by the way, if you want to define a variable to be a global variable, you can write global, for example, a, and it is considered as global variable. But you don't need to do that, because by default it is going to be considered as global. This is about the functions, not the classes. And about the classes, I'm going to explain how it happens. So here we are inside the main body of the code, and we want to see what happens here. But what if I change a, and here I'm going to change a to 7, for example. So let's see what happens here. Run the code, and as you can see here, the first print a here, which refers to a equals 5, prints out 5. But when we call a function, and let me run a function before print a, because this is also important for proving my word. Okay, this is the same. when we call the function, it's going to print out a, which is 7, so it's not going to consider 5 as a number because it has been modified to 7. However, when it wasn't defined inside the function, it wasn't declared or changed, it was 5, but now it's 7. But from outside of the function, when we are calling a, it is still a equals 5, because here the variable a is changed to local. The kind of a that is equal to 7 is a local variable, and it doesn't change the global scope of the variable, which is 5. And here, because it's global from outside of a function, we're printing a, it prints a, and it's equal to 5. Imagine that we are inside of a function, so imagine that we're not in the main body, and so let me use tab instead of space also for this one and all of these parts, and I can delete this one as well. So here I can define a function called main function, and there we go, we have a function inside of a function, and we've called the function, which is the inner one, from the outer function. So also let me correct this one, and then we're going to call the whole main function, and see what happens here. So we can also print a from the outer function, which is main function, print a, and also have the function itself running. So if you guess, you might think that we will have just the same as before. We will have function, and it's the result is 7, and for the print a, the result might be 5. As you can see here, the same thing happens, but what if I comment a equals 7? So as you can see, both of the numbers also will be the same. So this one is a global variable for this function, but from outside of a function, we cannot have this a here. So if I print a from outside of a function, as you can see here, we have the error shown in the VS Code, and if you don't have that editor, you will face an error while running the code in the terminal, which says name a is not defined because it is inside of a function. And so as a result, this is a local variable, not a global one, and because we haven't defined a variable inside the main body of the code, so we don't have a as a global variable, so we cannot print it out because the code says, the console says that it is not defined. So here let's get back to the example that we had before by pressing Ctrl+C. So I'm going to get back to the function that we had here, and there we go. So here we have 5, and let me run this code one more time. As you can see, we have 7 and 5 as a result of the two calling of a. So in the first one, we've called the function, and the function is executed, and we have a equals to 7. Then we have printed a, and the result is 7. And then we have printed a, the global a, which is 5, and we cannot access the local a, which has changed to 7. But what if I say global global A, and this changes the scope of the variable from local to global. And let's see what happens here. As you can see, the variable for the result for both of these are 7. Why? Because here A equals 5 changes to 7, and the reason this happens is because here we have global. So this A here was global, and it wouldn't change by a local variable A equals 7, but because A changed from local to global inside of the function, it is now global here inside of the function. And here, by printing A, and by either by calling the function or by printing the variable, we can get the very same results. So whether you are inside of a class or function, for accessing or changing any kind of variable that you want from outside of the function or class, you can define it as global. So here, if I comment this part, you can get the same result for both of them, 7 and 7. And here, even if I do not execute the function, it probably won't work because we haven't declared the variable, we haven't executed the function, and thus we haven't declared the variable. So let's see what happens here. As you can see, we face an error which says name A is not defined. And in order to define A, we need to execute the function at least once. So let's define it again, and as you can see, we have 7 here. So if I comment print here, print it from outside of a function. So first I execute the function and then print A. As you can see, we can access the variable from inside of a function, which is no more local because it has been defined as global, like this.